We're looking forward to Dr. Shelina Jilani, who's a forensic expert on facial identification recognition, providing a talk for us here tonight. Now, not only is Shelina from Bradford, which is great for us, but also studied her degree, her master's and a PhD at the University of Bradford. So it's a real pleasure to welcome her back this evening. And her PhD supervisor, Professor Hassan Miguel, is here as well tonight, so no pressure. And I understand you did your doctoral research on the challenges of ethnicity verification using the bespoke data set of facial images, and then started looking at human and machine perspectives on facial recognition, which no doubt we'll hear more about, and have moved on to looking at AI and its usage in this area. So after 10 years in the British legal sector, I'm now currently working for Interpol in London. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight and hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me this evening. It's a real honour to be back at the University of Bradford, where everything began for me. When I actually received this email, this invitation, believe it or not, I thought it was spam. I actually was on site visiting Professor Ogel, and I asked for his opinion on this, what should I do, and I managed to meet Anna, and I knew that it wasn't spam, and it's a legitimate opportunity to present. I was really honoured and humbled to be given this opportunity, so thank you very much. Before I present on my topic, which is the interplay between facial identification skills and artificial intelligence, I'd like to also give some thanks. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank Anna, all the way in the back. Thank you so much, Anna, for your patience and for putting into place all the arrangements that have allowed me to be here with you all this evening. I'd like to also thank all my family, my friends, my colleagues, my peers, Professor Ogel, etc., who are now here in presence, and also my colleagues, my friends, my supporters, let's say, who are also logged on virtually across different time zones to listen to this Cantor technology lecture. So I really thank you, and I'm humbled with your support. It all began for me back in 2008 when I started to study here at the University of Bradford on facial forensic and medical science. And back then, I'm really happy with this image, by the way, because I think it's my best angle. It's really giving Vogue, I would say. So back then, I knew that I wanted to study forensic and medical science. I knew that I wanted to work within the domain of forensic science. I was invested and had a great fondness for crime data studies. But I just didn't know kind of the trajectory upon which I wanted to work or progress. I knew that I had a zeal, enthusiasm for this domain. I just didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And this photograph was taken during one of our laboratory sessions, actually Professor Wilson's laboratory sessions, on floor F in this building, in the Richmond building, as one of the advertisements for some internal brochure. And back then, what I did know is I'd be working in this field, and I knew that I'd be working in a building that had a lot of glass. It sounds a bit weird and probably quite difficult to articulate what I mean by that, but I knew that I would work in an establishment where there was a lot of glass. So when I was working at a private company in Leeds, the structure was fairly modern. There was, of course, a lot of glass. But I just wasn't sure what my calling was. And when I started my PhD in 2015, I had graduated in 2020 during COVID, And I was given the opportunity to lecture at the University of East London in Bradford on counterterrorism and digital policing. And again, this university has a very modern face, infrastructure. And even then I was like, I know I'm going to work somewhere, but I don't know what that place is. Fast forward to 2023, I started to work at Interpol. And something within me, call it philosophical, call it religious, call it just sheer grit and belief, I knew this was the place that I was meant to be. In all those years of uncertainty or trying to find my place came to light. And I found my footing at Interpol in Lyon, and I've been working there since 2023. So I've been very kindly introduced, but I'd like to just speak about a couple of my achievements. So I'm currently employed at Interpol in Lyon as a face examiner, and I work within the fingerprint and facial recognition unit. My join date was in September of 2023. In addition to my professional capabilities, I'm actually quite heavily invested in giving back to the community. I've been an educational mentor for students as part of the Aziz Foundation, which is a charitable organisation in London. And I had a master's student who I mentored for 12 months. And she actually received a distinction in her master's. I've also been an educational mentor for Anglo Educational Services. Again, another similar line of working where it's almost like a exchange student program. And I was mentoring a student in California. In addition to that, I love to read and learn about new forensic science techniques. I'm an avid follower of anything crime-related on Netflix. So I think that's what makes me human and I hope relatable. So that's a bit about me. I think before I speak about facial identification, it's important to speak about concepts that are related to the identification of faces or how we see faces. It's important to lay that groundwork from the offset. So face pareidolia is a perception, okay? This is where the brain is triggered to see faces in objects that do not contain them. So these objects can be inanimate. So you may see a face in a piece of a toast or a cloud. You may see things that look like face formations within natural formations, i.e. stones, rocks, or even abstract patterns where you may recognize the face in a splatter of a paint or random arrangement. You can see here, there's sliced capsicum or bell peppers, whichever term you prefer. And you can see that when the capsicum is sliced, this white fleshy region is called the pith. And there appears to be a formation, a natural formation, of what we would see, our brain would perceive as a face. 2 eyes and a mouth, and possibly some teeth. But that is not the case. It is just our brain triggering this onset of what we call pareidolia, the ability to see face or face features in objects that do not contain them. When we speak about faces, of course I mentioned pareidolia, it's also important to understand how, as humans and as the brain, the organ itself, how it recognizes faces. And this is called face perception. So face perception is the ability to recognize and understand information from the faces that we encounter. One of the first models which researched and looked into face perception was reported by Bruce and Young in 1986. And this model is a staged model which proposed a pathway for both familiar and unfamiliar faces. So let's have a look at that. This slide may seem a bit overwhelming, but I believe me, I have simplified it. Essentially what happens is the brain will see a face, okay? So it's a happy face, okay? And the first point of call is structural encoding. This is where the brain perceives the face and automatically there are, let's say, actions that are happening within the brain. View-centered descriptions and expression-independent descriptions. So you're watching me present. Your brain is triggered. Your brain is trying to create a template of my face for your memory. Okay, and the brain is focusing on view-centered description. So what you can see, subject to your viewing point, i.e. a frontal viewpoint. You're also looking at, your brain is also looking to function the way my face is, my features are recorded, irrespective of how I'm speaking or what muscle is moving, i.e. expression-independent description. Now, if you had the pleasure to know me on a greater level, so my family members, Professor Gell, of course, I would be classed as a familiar person to you. And because I'm a familiar person to you, there are a number of specific nodes, FRUs, facial recognition units, and PINs, person identity nodes. Let's consider these as specific QR codes that your brain has stored in its memory of a face that is familiar. So when a face that is familiar, your partner, your parent, your sibling, etc., when you see a face and it's registered as familiar, you automatically are able to generate a name because your brain has that memory of that face. Given different contexts, whether it's raining outside, whether the person is hooded, whether the hair has grown in length or has been cut in length, whether the color has changed, any transient changes. Because the face has a collection of that data, of those faces that are familiar, you're able to generate a name. In contrast, if the face is unfamiliar, there's a lot more cognitive load. It's a lot more of an effortful process, because now your brain is having to work harder, of course it does anyway, to look at the face, to identify the expression, to look at the way the face and features are moving based on spatial speech analyses, and also directed visual learning. Now, while the pathway for familiar and unfamiliar faces are different, the cognitive system, which is class of step 4 within this face perception model, is actually working consistently concurrently in the background. It's allowing your brain to basically give information to try and disseminate between a face that's being received as either and classified as either familiar or unfamiliar. So think about it like somebody working in the background, and I'm presenting and someone sitting in the background showing me cue cards of what I should be saying. I'm looking at those cue cards and I'm reading. Something like that. That would be the analogy that I would use to explain how the cognitive system works within the face perception model proposed by Bruce and Young. So when we know that this model proposes a binary pathway for face recognition or face perception, there's obviously two pathways, familiar and unfamiliar. It really begs the question as to how different should faces be in order for us to reliably tell them apart. This doesn't mean to say that you have to be an expert in facial identification to do so. It just means how different should a face look in order for you and your brain to perceive a face different compared to another. So if I was to ask you a question, in this paradigm, in this lineup of faces, how many identities can you see? I propose your answer may be 1, 2, 3, or 5. 2. In fact, that is correct. There are two faces. There's a face here, and there's a face here. The faces in the center are all average faces. But it begs the question, what is classed as a familiar face and what is classed as an unfamiliar face, and how does that process occur? What are the features that drive that type of face recognition? So, unfamiliar face recognition is driven by external face features, facial hair, contours, facial shape, ears, whereas familiar face recognition is driven by the internal face features, features within the face, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. And typically for familiar face recognition, the features of the eyes, the nose, and the mouth have to be in their primary configuration, i.e. the eyes have to be positioned ideally above the nose, and the nose has to be positioned ideally above the mouth. And whilst this type of recognition has been heavily researched into, there are also those individuals who are on the spectrum, neither in the familiar face recognition domain or end, or the unfamiliar face recognition end. There are those individuals who are called prosopagnostics, who suffer from prosopagnosia, also known as facial blindness. These are individuals who, as a result of degenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, suffer injury to the region of their brain and therefore fail to recognize faces, even if those faces were once familiar to them. There's also the onset of prosopagnosia as a result of trauma and injury to regions of the brain. So on a spectrum, when we think about face recognition, we must consider those faces that are classified as familiar, those faces that are classified as unfamiliar, and those individuals that unfortunately suffer from facial blindness, prosopagnosia. So we have some stills here, and what I'm demonstrating here, as I mentioned, internal face features drive familiar face recognition. The ability for you to recognize your partner, your mother, your friend, your sibling is based on the recognition of internal face features, eyes, nose, and mouth, in contrast to external face features, which drive unfamiliar face recognition, okay? So, if I ask you this question here, we have this set of image of Bill Clinton, and we have a set of images here of George W. Bush. My question to you members of the audience is, these two images, they're of Bill Clinton, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's an overwhelming yes. And these images are these faces are of George W. Bush, is that correct?
No.
No, why is that? Yes, please go ahead.
The older gentleman has a bigger forehead than the other gentleman.
Could that be associated to male pattern baldness?
I don't know. I'm guessing they don't look the same, and the eyebrows are different, and their chins,
Fantastic.
and one of them's got a pointier nose.
Okay, could that also be down to facial expression and the way the muscles move in the face?
Possibly.
Okay. So, to answer the question that I posed myself, there's research conducted by Sinha and Pogil. And what they looked at was this internal and external feature classification, okay? Because as I mentioned, internal face features drive familiar face recognition and external face features drive unfamiliar face recognition. So therefore, this research should be solidifying that statement. However, what it does is actually makes it a lot more robust. This image is of Bill Clinton. And this image is actually the face, actual contour, the face, the hair, etc., is actually the then Vice President Al Gore. I see some nodding head. Yeah. What is the same between these two images? What are same are the internal face features. So this is demonstrating that if you, because we all, I'm sure, are aware of who Bill Clinton is, because we know that individual, it's familiar face recognition. Therefore, the recognition of this face is based on just that, familiar faces, i.e. internal face features. But we fail to recognize that actually the contours and the facial, the head, is not Bill Clinton. It's actually the then Vice President, Al Gore. Equally, the lady in the audience alluded to the fact that this forehead is greater than this forehead. And again, this image is actually, the internal face features are of George W. Bush, but the external features, the hair, the facial shape, the contours, even the worn eyewear, actually belong to the then Vice President, Dick Cheney. So this research by Sinha and Pogio just further solidifies the fact that if we know someone, we're familiar with them, our recognition automatically is driven by internal face features, okay? So then what happens when we have individuals, ladies who wear the headscarf? Because as I mentioned, internal face features drive familiar face recognition and external face features drive unfamiliar face recognition. Well, research by Ahmed Mabraya looked into something called the headscarf effect. And the headscarf effect reported that there is a culture-based internal face feature advantage in parts of the world where ladies practice wearing the headscarf. What do I mean by that? So, we live in a world where some ladies wear headscarves, and there's different types of headscarf styles: turban, tight fit, loose fit, etc. And the purpose of this research by Ahmed Mabraya wanted to see how robust are internal features for the recognition of people who are unfamiliar. Because when people are living in environments where the headscarf is very common, they don't have access to the additional supplementary, let's say, or information for recognition. No hair, no facial contour, or the facial contour is derived based on the type of headscarf that is worn, and no detail in the ear, etc. So the research that he conducted, he had some CCTV, and he asked the lady to commit a crime wearing a headscarf. Then the CCTV was recreated with the same lady now not wearing the headscarf. And what he found was students who participated in the research in Egypt, for example, had a higher level of accuracy in identifying females when the headscarf was worn, in contrast to when the headscarf was not worn, even though the amount of data was quite limited. The opposite was recorded in the more western part of the world, in the US, for example, where the students performed better in recognizing or identifying the female perpetrator in a lineup or a paradigm of images where the headscarf was not worn and the face and the external features were visible. Okay, so the headscarf effect demonstrates the fact that there is a culture-based internal face feature processing advantage in parts of the world. There's also further research to suggest and report that faces are special. We know this. There's anthropometric studies that have been carried out to measure and report on which region of the face is the most diverse amongst the male and female sex. There's also research to say and report that as humans, the ability to recognize a face is innate. Everyone can do this. Of course, with the caveat of those individuals, or with the exception of those individuals who suffer, unfortunately, from facial blindness from prosopagnosia. But in the inferior temporal lobe of our brain, there's a region called the fusiform gyrus. And within the fusiform gyrus, we all, yourself and I, have a core face network. Okay? And within this network, there are regions that are specific for the processing of faces. So what sets apart an expert from a novice when it comes to recognizing or conducting facial identification is a level of expertise and qualification and practice. Because as humans, the ability to recognize a face is innate. Why? Because in the brain, we all have a region where there are face-specific neurons, okay? So the regions of the core face network are the FFA, the fusiform face area, the OFA, the occipital face area, and the STS, superior temporal focus. So I've just presented briefly about pareidolia, this ability of our brain to trigger this phenomenon of seeing faces in objects that don't normally or naturally contain them. I've spoken about face perception, and as humans, how our brain works based on the Bruce and Young model on perceiving a face, with the two binary pathway for faces that are familiar and for faces that are unfamiliar. I presented on the role of external and internal features on the type of recognition. I've also presented and given you the knowledge that you can all take back to know that everyone has the ability to recognize a face because there are regions in the brain which are face specific. In the 19th century, we had an advancement in technology and in science. And this setup came about. Does anybody know what this setup may represent? It's actually a setup created by Alphonse Bertillon, a French criminologist and a pioneer, who became fed up of the lack of a criminal identification system. He wanted to create a system that was easy to and very seamless in identifying repeat offenders. And his proposition was very simple. If someone offends repeatedly a day, let's capture their photograph, a frontal view and a profile view. Let's take some nominal data. Let's also take some biometric data in terms of measurements of the face, the cranium, and the body, anthropometric landmarks. And this system was widely adopted. So this is an example of a Bertillon card, where we have the height of the individual, the weight, some measurements, the face width, for example, length. We also have, of course, a frontal image and a profile image. So therefore, it allowed for the introduction of what we know now as a custody image or a mugshot. And then also some additional nominal information. Plus, who captured the image and at what date. Perfect. It's an inclusive, comprehensive card of a person. It's basically a very early infancy level QR code for someone. Or is it? The case of the Will and William West was actually the demise of the Bertillon system. We have an image here of William West. And this is Will West. Now, Will is not short for William. It's just Will. These are two different individuals. William West was incarcerated, was in prison in Kansas. And 2 years post his incarceration, Will West was processed at the same jailhouse. And looking at the Bertillon cards, the prison clerk became a bit confused because these individuals to him looked fairly similar. The Synopsis card showed the same measurement for the face, the cranium, for example, same anthropometric measurements. And he was adamant that Will was William. The only biometric data that allowed for the discrimination between Will and William West was actually the fingerprints, because the fingerprints were different. And this really demonstrated, because of that, of course, that the downfall of the paternity system came about, but also demonstrated, as a result of this case, the robustness of fingerprint. And that's why we had a more higher uptake of fingerprint-based recognition, and therefore we had the Henry classification, for example, the Henry classification system. Moving on from the 19th century, we're now into the early 20th century. Science has evolved, technology has evolved, or it's evolving, and we are now at a stage where experts, police officers, people within the legal and policing domain can work to instruct individuals, experts in the field, to conduct something known as facial image comparison. Facial image comparison is a manual process conducted by professionals, forensic practitioners, who determine whether imagery, still or moving, contains faces or face of the known individual. So let's say we have male A, and the proposition would be, is male A in the questioned material male B, who is the defendant? Facial image comparison is an admissible form of evidence, and it's routinely used and instructed by police officers and also QC councils, etc., for facial identification purposes and also verification, to see whether or not this person is the person that he or she portrays to be. The analysis can be one-to-one or one-to-n, and facial images that are subject to facial image comparison are based on and are subject to a lot of scrutiny. Image quality conditions, lighting conditions, facial viewpoints, time lapse between images, because sometimes CCTV images can be recorded 5 years prior, or images can be given of someone who may have been in his early 20s, but the perpetrator of the questioned images is now someone who looks more later in his, a lot more later in his adult years, late 50s, for example. The first case.
What's 1 to n?
1 to many. One of the first cases where facial image comparison was utilized as an expert evidence within the UK was the R.V. Stockwell case. The defendant, Adrian Stockwell, was accused of committing a crime. And at that time, the CCTV footage wasn't as good as it is now in terms of technologically advanced. The quality of the material was very grainy. So the police obtained the CCTV footage and they instructed an expert to conduct what was then known as anthropometric analyses or facial mapping. Facial mapping was the term used previously for what we call now facial image comparison. And the expert conducted the analyses using the CCTV footage, capturing stills and comparing those with images of the defendant, Mr. Stockwell, and concluded that there were significant similarities between the two. The defense on the opposite side argued that the expert evidence should not be allowed because within a criminal investigation, within the eyes of the court and the law, this method was still at its infancy stage. Nobody had ever conducted this type of analysis before. Actually, at the end of the criminal investigation and the trial, the judge did deem facial mapping, now known as facial image comparison, as an admissible form of evidence, okay, allowing for it to be heard in front of impartial jury members. He deemed that this type of evidence is based on scientific findings. The criticisms, of course, naturally came from the defense to say that this type of technique was still primitive, which in fact it was. But ultimately, the key principles from the R.V. Stockwell case, where facial image comparison was first utilized in the UK, is the fact that this case demonstrates expert evidence in digital imagery can be presented to court and can assist the jury in matters that are beyond their knowledge. Okay, the decision to convict ultimately is down to the members of the jury. Therefore, they have the right to judge the strength and the robustness of the evidence that is being presented. The request to conduct facial image comparison is multifactorial. Images can be analyzed for the purpose of identity management. So, for example, if there's a live investigation, there can be individuals that can be as nominated nominals for identification purposes. Screening and controlled access. So again, this can be image to image or image to live. So think about when you are at the airport and someone is looking at your passport at the border control. And now, of course, we're moving towards, or we have moved towards e-gates. And also, of course, to assist in criminal investigations by the means of conducting forensic analyses on the images to help present that evidence in front of the jury. Factors for consideration when conducting facial image analyses are multifold, let's say. But one of the most obvious things to look into and to be aware of are factors of aging, because aging unfortunately happens to every single one of us, and aging can be intrinsic at a cellular level, but also extrinsic, okay, based on the environment within which you live and the lifestyle that you choose to live by. Recording devices. So has something that is in question been recorded on a CCTV camera, on a Ring doorbell? Has it been recorded on a screen using a telephone, a smart device? Facial data, for example. So what is the amount of face that you can see or not? And also the presence or absence of soft biometric markers. So scars, tattoos, moles, anything that is uniquely identifying and specific to an individual. So during the process of image comparison, facial image comparison, practitioners will look at the classification of class and subclass features. A class feature is a whole feature, so eyes, nose, mouth, and a subclass is the subanatomic component of that class feature. So, for example, we have the nose. That's the class feature. To categorize that in its subclass features, you talk about the pronasal, the tip of the nose, or the nasal alars, the nostrils, or the nasal profile, whether there's a dorsal hump, a protrusion, whether it's a convex nasal profile or a concave nasal profile, etc. So classification of face features using scientific descriptors for both the class and the subclass features. Within the realm of facial image comparison, the unknown subject, the person of interest, let's say, or people of interest, are also are commonly or routinely referred to as the unknown subject or subjects. And the reference is the control, i.e. the defendant or defendants. This is the example, and not a very inclusive or, not a very exhaustive list, because there are a lot of features that can be categorized just from the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. But of course, I had a limit based on the PowerPoint slide, so I had to plus make it very appealing to the eye. So I had to kind of limit and structure this slide as best as possible. But in the region of the eye, the periocular, it includes the eyebrows and the eyes. And there are a host of subclass categories that we as experts can categorize just from that region. So for example, the placement of the eyebrows, including the shape of the eyebrow, the tone of the eyebrow, and any design, whether there's a medial peak, whether there's an arch, whether there's symmetry in the shape or not. The presence of an epicanthic fold. Some people have this epicanthic fold, some people don't. There's also parts of the world where specific tapes can be worn to increase or open up the eye, for example, which can disguise this region. Hooding to the eyelids, okay? Infraorbital creases, these creases that develop from the inner canthus, the endocanthion, typically go all the way down the face, okay? This is different to a tear trough, which is actually the depression in between those creases. So it's separate to a tear trough. The shape of the endocanthion. So again, the inner canthus or the medial canthus. Again, there's a lot of different terminology, but that's the region of the inner canthus or endocanthion. The presence of soft biometric markers. So in this region, is there any scarring, any tattoos, any worn accessories, anything to uniquely identify this individual beyond those features that are transient, that can be changed or altered? And of course, worn accessories. So again, piercings or types of clip-on jewelry, for example, or eyewear, so sunglasses or vision glasses. In the region of the nose, again, the nasal region, we can call it on the nasal root, the most superior aspect, of the nasal bridge. Typically, it's hidden when we wear glasses because it's at the most superior aspect of that nasal anatomy. The nasal bridge, the bridge of the nose, the pronasal, the nasal tip, the nostril, the tip of the nose, the nasal alveoli, which are the nostrils, okay, the right and the left. Is there symmetry in that? Some people don't have a symmetrical nasal alveoli. Also, we can comment on the exposure of the nasal cavity. Some people have greater exposure than others. We can also comment on the nasal sulcus, which is this defined crease. Some people have a very defined nasal sulcus, some people don't. Bearing in mind that these features can be exaggerated with a difference in facial expression. Also, soft biometric markers, so again, scars, tattoos, moles, and whether there's any worn accessories, so jewelry or etc. The mouth, the oral cavity, again, the philtrum we can comment on, so the upper lip, the philtrum grooves, these vertical lines that some people have, they are pronounced in some, and sometimes they're not as pronounced in other individuals. The width of the mouth, and I know that some of the students that are here attending the masterclass session actually commented on this during their exercise. The fullness of the labial, the lips, whether there's symmetry in that fullness, or whether one lip, the superior labial, is fuller than the lower, the inferior, or vice versa. The cupid's bow, which is this intersection here, whether it's a depressed V-shaped cupid's bow or a flat U-shaped cupid's bow. Pigmentation, everyone has typically a level or an amount of pigmentation beyond cosmetics, of course, in this region. And sometimes the difference in pigmentation and the placement of that pigmentation can be enough to allow for either a comparison to include or exonerate an individual. The stomia, the region, the center point of the mouth when the mouth is closed, sometimes people have excess skin in this region, which may also be a unique biometric feature or a marker or a characteristic of someone. Again, biometric markers, scars, tattoos, moles in this region. I'm not really sure, actually no. I do know someone who has a tattoo inside the lip. Kim Kardashian, just putting it out there. And worn accessories. Again, so sometimes people may wear some kind of lip jewelry or anything that could, they prefer really. Again, there's additional features to comment on. So for the ear, we can comment on the helix, its outer structure. We can comment on the protrusion. We can comment on the inner ear anatomy, if visible. Okay. Also, you can comment on the placement of worn jewelry, dependent on the inner ear anatomy. Lobe attachment, worn accessories, soft biometric markers. So we can see that there's some moles here and here, but the root of the lobe and the region here of the antihelix. And also any disfigurements. So some of you may or may not watch, let's say, boxing, MMA, and what we classify as or associate with a very swollen ear as a cauliflower ear because of constant trauma in that region. That's a form of disfigurement. Of course, it's temporary because the blood can be drained, but still it can be used as a good characteristic for the purpose of facial image comparison. Facial contours, again, jowling, facial hair. Because whilst individuals may or may not, may have facial hair, it's very subjective and transient, individualistic, because not every type of facial hair design or pattern is the same. Some people also have balding within regions of their facial hair. So these are things that can be commented upon. And of course, hair is transient, but there's a lot of additional features that can be commented on. So style, length, texture is visible, tone, etc. So the purpose of showing you these slides is just to demonstrate that while facial image comparison may, in your mind, or would have initially in your mind, been associated with just the class features, the internal features, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, actually the recognition goes beyond that. It goes to features that include external features, which actually is super important, okay? Because sometimes experts can be asked to conduct facial image analyses, but you may find or come across a region of tonal contrast which is indicative of a mole or a scar or a tattoo on a region maybe on the neck, or maybe somewhere else, in the hand, for example. So it's still a type of analysis, but the region is not just limited to just the face. So I've spoken about features that are utilized for facial image comparison, and I've given you a very quick run through of those type of class features and how we can, as experts, categorize those in a lot more detail. But let's talk now about the processes and the techniques used by experts in conducting facial image analyses. There are 4 techniques. One is the most routinely used and has been reported to be the most robust. Whilst the others are still a form of analyses, it's still important to make comment to them or on them. So holistic face processing relates to this innate ability to recognize the face. As I mentioned during the earlier segment of this presentation, everyone has this region in the inferior temporal lobe of the brain. Everyone has the ability to recognize the face. But what sets apart an expert from a novice is the amount and the quality and the quantity of that interaction with the face. So holistic analysis is basically a snapshot analysis. It's not detailed, it's just looking at a face and ascertaining whether or not there's sufficient detail for an expert to conduct comprehensive analysis. So this type of technique is routinely used in scenarios which require quick decision. So for example, at borders, at immigration, for example, desks, but sometimes that can still be managed by a secondary individual, someone to peer review that analysis, because it's very difficult to compare a 2D flat image to someone who stood right in front of you, who may have had undergone cosmetic differences, aesthetic changes, or just natural aging. Anthropometric analyses, so this relates to the use of measurements and relative proportions of face features, okay? And the important thing with anthropometric analysis to remember is that whilst it's a technique for facial image comparison, it's not routinely used. Because when we work with CCTV images or passport images or images from social media platforms, they are unconstrained images. They are not in the ideal scenario where we have best lighting conditions, there's no changes in facial feature recording. And therefore, when you conduct anthropometric analyses, you may be looking at CCTV recorded from an elevated bird's eye view and comparing it to images which are in a very neutral facial position. And that difference is what causes differences in measurements between face features and relative proportions. So this method is not to be utilized for facial image comparison and is never used as a standalone method. Similarly, superimposition. Again, it's within the name, superimposition, to overlay 2 images for the purpose of visual identification or comparison. But in order to have an accurate image overlay, a superimposed image, you must have images that are in the like-for-like viewpoint. Same camera, same subject to camera distance, same facial expression, ideally the same day, because there may be changes in weight gain, weight loss, etc. So again, this type of analysis should not be used for reliable analyses, considering that there are a number of variables which can affect the compression artifact. Image quality, distortion, how close the camera or the recording device is to the frame, to the face. Visibility, because not everybody will go out and commit a crime demonstrating and showcasing their face in full visibility. It's usually an element of disguise. So therefore, superimposition should never be used again as a standalone approach to facial image comparison. The method that is routinely used and that has been categorized and reported to be the most robust is morphological analysis, the use of scientific descriptors, the use of class and subclass features to comment on the feature, use scientific terminology to say whether or not there are features of association and or disassociation between an unknown subject and a reference. The technique can be utilized in imagery without the need for a like-for-like viewpoint, though of course image quality is important. Because whilst you may have an unoccluded facial image, the quality may be very poor. And therefore you can only comment on what you can see, because the image is made up of the pixels that it is made up of, and that's it. You can't generate new pixels. Typically, to prevent inter-observed variability, in certain organizations and laboratories, they may have a feature reference list to allow or guide the expert or practitioner or analyst to look at the face features in chronology to allow comment to occur. Or, so sometimes that can happen. So for at this point, I'll park that part of this section, of this presentation there. Facial image comparison, the ability of an expert practitioner to conduct analyses on imagery, moving or still, using scientific descriptors to ascertain whether an unknown subject is the reference. And we do this by the means of scientific descriptors, i.e. class and subclass features. And these subclass features or class features are, of course, analyzed in detail. And there are 4 techniques for facial image comparison. Holistic, very snapshot analyses, just kind of looking at the face at a very rudimentary level, superficial level. Anthropometric analyses, the use of measurements from the face, but it's not a reliable method, so we don't use it. Superimposition, the overlay of 2 images, or an image on top of another. Again, it has a lot of constraints because you have to have a like-for-like viewpoint, therefore it's not utilized. And the most robust and the most research type of technique is morphological analyses, where scientific descriptors are utilized to classify the face and its features. Now I will speak about the evolution of facial recognition technology, before I talk about the interplay between the two. So, the facial recognition technology, of course, we've advanced in science, in technology, and in general in computational science. But at the early stage, at infancy level, when facial recognition was first reported by researchers Woody Bledsoe and his collaborators, they were utilizing hand-drawn features because they wanted to see whether it was possible or plausible for a computer to recognize a face. And given a data set of a couple of images, originally there were thousands, it was reduced down to I think 150. They were able to demonstrate that handcrafted or manual landmark detection was possible. You feed in the computer these measurements, and the computer is able to pick out a face amongst that data set. Very simple, and of course groundbreaking at that time. Because the facial recognition system at that time was still in infancy, accuracy was typically below 50%. And there's a lot of sensitivity to lighting, viewpoints, etc., because of course it's still starting. The hardware utilized was very simple. Laboratory computers didn't have the computational power that computer systems have now in the current climate, and there was no mobile implementation. The challenge or limitation associated with that type of analyses in that phase of facial recognition during infancy was the fact that there's no real-time use, there's no large data set, the material is not scalable. It was just a thought, it was just an interest which demonstrated its fruitfulness. It did work. We fast forward to the early 2000s, and we're now in the era of digital, early digital, And techniques involved a lot more. The techniques became a lot more computational, a lot more robust. Eigenfaces, PCA, the ability to match 2D photos. There was a more ample data sets available online for experts and for researchers to utilize. The accuracy shot up from less than 50% to between 70 to 80%. There were implementations of these biometric passports. There were some applications within security. The systems, i.e. the hardware, vastly improved. But again, there were still limitations with pose, variability, and there was also this issue of spoofing, where algorithms were still getting tricked, let's say, by other images of other people being held up to systems. And then we move now to the modern era, the years 2010 plus to present. And we have the introduction of artificial intelligence and these deep convolution neural networks and deep 3D sensing models and infrared lighting and infrared sensing, should I say, where the accuracy shot up to more than 99%. We have a very obvious case of this, let's say, implementation of robust facial recognition with our iPhone. So during the lockdown, the pandemic, nobody was wearing masks. And what happened when we started to wear masks? Sometimes the face wasn't being recognized by our phone, and therefore the phone wouldn't be unlocked. But quickly, the data scientists recognized that, and they updated the algorithm in order to introduce that lack of facial data to allow that analysis to occur, and therefore to allow facial recognition to work in or with less facial data or less availability of the face. In the current climate, we have a lot of smartphones, as I mentioned, Face ID, wide applications in security in the border force region, and of course we have the use of the cloud service. Again, given that we have such advancements in modern AI, there are still limitations because there's always going to be limitations, okay? Currently, the limitations are in terms of training the algorithms, so bias is an issue to ensure that there is a data set that is representative of every single phenotypic variation of a person. And also there's a lot of now research into the privacy and the governance of these type of AI applications. And we have recently had the EU AI Act that's also been published. So whilst technology has advanced, and we've moved from this infancy stage of hand-drawn features to a lot more robust and technologically savvy deep neural networks, there are still limitations. So we can consider face recognition as this simple kind of sentence that I have here. Facial recognition went from drawing rules, so we can just draw features, manually map them like landmarks, to comparing faces or photos, to now understanding the face like a friend. This is where the interplay comes into place between artificial intelligence and facial recognition and the experts. At Interpol, we utilize a facial recognition algorithm, and our process of identification is twofold. The algorithm is working to bring out nominals, and as experts, my colleagues and I are conducting the analyses. Okay, so I will speak about this now. So the analyses in step one is the algorithmic framework for metric analysis and comparison. It's a one-to-n comparison because an image is inputted into a data set of lots and lots of images, and I won't give the number away. And then a candidate list is brought up, and then that candidate list is manually analyzed by experts like myself and my colleagues using morphological analyses in order to give a decision. Okay, and there's always a peer review element into this. When there's a challenging comparison, or if there are the presence of twins or family members who share similar physical traits, which do pose a challenge in identification work, we have this kind of fallback because we can peer review each other's work and discuss our observations and come to the correct and right conclusion. So in a nutshell, artificial intelligence, in the broadest sense, relates to the field of science and the intelligence of computer systems. It's designed to mimic human intelligence by using algorithms, data science, machine learning to learn to classify objects, make decisions, etc. And this is accomplished through what we call neural networks, these array of interconnected nodes that we don't see, that relay information within multiple layers to find and derive meaning from the data. If we look at a simple algorithm, what happens first? Face detection. So within an image or a CCTV live stream or video stream, CNNs will work to identify a pattern. These patterns will allow the algorithm to locate a face. These algorithms will analyze pixels, edges, textures in order to pinpoint where that face is within the image. This process is multi-layered. So we have, as I mentioned, the CNNs, the interconnected nodes, and they are relaying information going down almost like a chamber. There are low-level features that are identified, such as edges, and also high-level information that is identified, such as complex patterns which relate to or constitute to facial contours, or the shape of the eye, or the shape of the mouth, etc. Once that information has been derived, that numeric representation of the face or faces, feature extraction is now the next step. So think about this as a facial template, a QR code that's being generated as that information is being taken using the CNNs. Okay. Once the information has been retrieved and that QR code has been generated, it's now the stage of face matching. And this is where the detailed face print that's been generated is compared to those that have been previously stored. So think about when I spoke earlier about face perception and the ability to recognize a familiar face, because your brain has that stored memory of the familiar face. It's similar to that. This application of AI is complex. It's a complex mathematical technique, of course, but ultimately it concludes a very robust and an accurate identification and conclusion. In terms of decision making, the algorithm vendors or the data scientists who develop these algorithms already have predetermined expectations of what is the trade-off. What is the quality score at which an image should be accepted or should be rejected? Or at what point should the system flag up the image and allow there to be human intervention? Someone like myself or my colleagues to look at the image and manually decide whether we should input the image within the data set. A simple illustrative demonstration, let's say, of what I've spoken about is this. We have face detection within an image or a live stream. The image is put into the database. Facial feature extraction occurs, so all these minute information is taken, things that we can't see in the face, metrics as a number, let's say, and then the output are a number of faces, which can either contain a positive match or images that may look similar. But this decision making is ultimately down to the human. Okay, the algorithm will propose a candidate or a number of candidates, but the final arbiter of that decision is the human. So let's consider this. We've used an algorithm, and the algorithm has picked up this individual, Billy Book. And I thought of that, and I thought it was quite intelligent, if I say so myself. But Billy Bogus is looking to apply for a gym membership at Unique Fitness, and he submits this photograph of his brother, okay? And basically, I've been instructed by Unique Fitness to conduct a facial comparison between the unknown subject, okay, this individual, with the brother. And in order to evaluate my instruction, I have to consider alternative proposition, okay? A proposition that either aligns with the prosecution, so the unknown subject is Billy Bogus, and a proposition that aligns with the defense. The unknown subject is somebody else, because this demonstrates impartiality, okay? So, there are a number of observations that can be taken and extracted just from this image. And this list is, again, not exhaustive, because I was limited to the frame and the size of the slide. But there are, for example, observations such as dual-toned hair in style of an afro. Texture is visible with limited fine feature detail, and it's transient, because hair is transient. You can change the length, the color, the style, etc. There are forehead creases that are visible horizontally located on the forehead. Okay. There are also additional creases located at the region of the periocular, on the glabella and superior to the eye, so here. Okay. There's also a glabellar line that is extending from the right and the left nasion, which of course is covered by the eyewear, and it's peaked in appearance. So you can see it kind of, there's a line there, there's a line here, and it peaks. Okay, like an inverted triangle, for example, or triangle. I've commented on the eyebrows that are not visible because they're worn accessory. Detail can't be ascertained. Again, I can see some hooding to the eyelids, but again, this image, this observation is subject to what I can see. There's obscuration caused by the eyewear. The lateral canthus lines are visible, so the crow's feet here and here. Infraorbital creases, so remember these are the creases that come from the inner canthus, the endocanthus, and they extend outwards. Wide nasal bridge, arched nasal alas, so these are the base of the nostrils, they're arched, you can see here, they're not flat. Nasolabial folds that are extending from the region of the nasal sulcus, so again, these are what we call as typically as smile lines, nasolabial folds. There's a long or a large philtrum, the upper lip. There are visible philtrum grooves, these lines, these vertical lines on the philtrum, the upper lip. The mouth is wide, okay? There's a region of tonal contrast, tone and texture laterally on the philtrum, so here. There's something here, but I can't ascertain 100% what it is, whether it's a mole, whether it's a site of superficial trauma, or anything really. The labial is not full in thickness, the lips are not full. V-shaped pubis bow, this intersection here, and mentolabial sulcus, this region here. Okay, a couple of observations. Similarly, we have observations for the reference. So again, this time we have dark-toned hair, darker on the crown, relative to the parietal region, so the side of the cranium, and the temporal regions. It's a style of a comb over. So of course, the cranium is made up of the frontal bone, the temporal bone, the parietal bone, and the occipital bone at the head, at the back of the head, the posterior of the head. So here I'm using anthropology to qualify my observations of the type of hair pattern, okay, and style. Of course, there's male pattern baldness because we can see the recession at the frontal and parietal regions. Again, horizontal forehead creases, a vertical scar that's proximal to the hairline here. On the frontal bone, there's regions of tonal contrast located laterally on the forehead. So again, we can see some here, we can see some here. We don't know if they're age spots. Again, we never assume. Whilst we see detail in the image, we can never qualify unless we're absolutely 100% sure. Okay. And again, the list goes on. Additional creases located at the region of the perioculus, the region of the eyes, on the glabella and superior to the eyes. So these regions here and here. Eyebrows are deep set on the superciliary ridge or the eyebrow arch or the infraorbital ridge, whichever term individuals can use, because again, within the domain of facial image comparison, there are a lot of terminology. And whilst the terminology is accepted, there's no kind of concrete terminology that everyone adheres by. Every part of the world typically has a variation in that terminology, but usually experts understand what that would mean, okay, or they should at least. The wide nasion, so the gap between the eyebrows, this big large gap, so wide nasion, a depressed nasal root, this region here, hooded eyelids, lateral canthus lines, so again, the crow's feet or smile lines sometimes can be called. Infraorbital crease, so again, this crease that comes from the inner canthus all the way down to the face, not the tear trough, which is the depression. Wide nasal bridge and arched nasal ally. So what would you say the comparison would be? Is it a match or no match?
Seems like a match.
Yeah, exactly. So what we would do then is, of course, we would put images side by side, okay? And we would highlight the features of association between the two images and the features of disassociation, which may or may not be related to the image quality, the time between the images that have been taken. They may also just be transient changes. So anyone can change their hair, depending on, of course, time, the length, the style, the design, etc., and of course, worn accessories. So once the analysis has been conducted impartially of the unknown subject, we then conduct the analysis of the reference, the person in question, and then we do a comparison, okay? And as we've rightfully mentioned, it is a match. And this method is actually following the ACV process, analysis, comparison, evaluation, verification, to demonstrate impartiality and objectivity in analyses. Whilst the ACV process was initially reported and proposed for fingerprint classification, it is still utilized within the domain of facial image comparison. Importantly, whilst we can conduct facial image comparison either manually or with the use of algorithms, because we know that recognition is innate, everyone has the ability to recognize a face, but some people are better than others. And whilst the expert should have knowledge in the domain and in surrounding domains like anatomy, anthropology, for example, that individual should have also a sound understanding in how image quality affects analyses, okay? Because ultimately, image quality is essential for the reliability of facial image comparison. And of course, image quality is also important for the reliability of facial recognition technology. So within the domain of digital science, there are a number of variables that can affect the interpretation of the human face. So resolution, how many pixels are there in the image? Illumination, whether the lighting is artificial, ambient, infrared, or grayscale, black and white. Compression, occlusion, whether there's full face visibility or limited or partial face data. Motion blur, subject to camera distance. Because sometimes you can have very good quality cameras, let's say a Ring doorbell, which has a very high specification of the camera itself, but the face may be at very small in the frame because it's recorded at a distance. So whilst the quality of the camera is good, the subject to camera distance prevents an expert or someone from making that comprehensive analysis, okay? And of course, lens type, because again, sticking to this example of a Ring doorbell typically is a fisheye lens. So when you are closer to the camera, it distorts or augments your face features. That's not a true representation of the face feature. So these are just a couple of variables that an expert should be aware of and should consider when conducting analyses, but also when data scientists create, for example, algorithms, because sometimes they can work with these, let's say, weaknesses within the human or manual domain to create algorithms that are solutions for these, okay? And this nicely brings me to discuss a bit about the challenges, how we can further implement artificial intelligence within the domain of forensic facial image comparison. So facial image comparison is multifaceted, and it will go through and is going through a transformative change, okay? But ultimately, in order to use AI in the court, in the legal system, we have to have solutions that are based on accuracy, or improved accuracy, reliability, and admissibility of findings. Because typically, deep learning models are called or associated or referred to as black boxes. They're these things that really give good results, accurate results, but we don't really want them. How is that analysis getting conducted? How is something going in and coming out with a match or a non-match or nominals that may look the same? So one of the challenges and possible future directions for the implementation of AI would be to look at explainable AI. So the integration of an explainability model, like a decision tree. So let's say we can create, someone can work towards, maybe in this room, work towards creating an AI-based conclusion model. So instead of an expert like myself conducting the analyses, I could still conduct the analyses, but then run my image or images of question in the facial recognition system, the algorithm, and both generate the same match. And there would be a demonstrated framework. That algorithm would have a demonstrated framework to show what was the input to that model, what are the confidence scores associated with that image or the outputs, and how that decision has been paid. This would demonstrate the transparency of the use of AI within a legal framework, because of course, within a legal framework, it's very difficult to introduce artificial intelligence because there's no, I don't want to say trust, but there's no real validation of that use of technology within the legal sector. But I do believe that we are going and moving towards that. Multimodal fusion for enhanced identification. I caveat here, Professor Oriel. I know a lot of his work currently is in combination with colleagues and experts at Dubai Police, and they're looking at enhancing or creating multimodal identification systems, okay? So we could combine not just facial biometrics, but also accompany those with gait analyses or voice recognition or eye movement and blink patterns. Depends on the question at hand in order to create a solution for that proposition, for that research question. Also real-time deployment. So an issue with implementing AI is, of course, balancing speed, accuracy, and privacy. Given the fact that there's a lot of legislation that has been recently put out to utilize this type of technology in the safest way, without any discrimination and of course impartial. So a future direction may be by creating or developing a mobile handheld device, which would, for example, a body-worn camera, okay, which has a system, an algorithmic framework, which automatically screens the subject, okay, and this may be something that could be used either at borders. Now, of course, we see this with migrants and migration, but also for active investigations. Before I conclude my presentation, and I hope I'm kind of on time, and I'd like to pose a question to you. There are 3 little short quizzes. This is where you do the work and I don't. I sit back or stand back. My first question to you is, how can you identify the owners of the facial features in the image? The only correct answer I will accept is someone who's able to identify correctly all 3 features. So the question is, can you identify the owners of the facial features in the image? We have one. Anybody else? Okay, so sure, I'll start with yourself first, gentlemen, and then we'll come. I have 3 quizzes, so there's ample opportunity. So yes, sir.
King Charles.
So this is King Charles, okay. Okay, so we're gonna pause it there. The lady, yes?
I can do the mouth, because I don't know if, is that Donald Trump?
That is correct, Donald Trump. This is a bit of a team effort. But who's gonna take away the prize? Who's gonna say this, who is this feature belonging to? So we have the eyes, the periocular region of King Charles, the mouth, the oral cavity of Donald Trump. What about the nose?
It's a painting. Is it your nose?
Exactly. How you Okay, there is chance to redeem yourself, guys. There's 2 more quizzes. So, let's see who else has been listening to mine attentively and watching attentively. Okay, so how many faces can you identify in the image? Of course, we can see 1, but in addition to that, how many faces can you identify in the image?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 6, 4.
So we have 4. Everybody is in agreement, so that's 4.
5.
5. Okay, 5. Okay. So, Steph, please tell me where the 5 are. If you would like to come to the front, or maybe I can give the pointer back. So.
No, she's stick with point then.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Please, please. So, feel free. There's 5. So, please tell me. It's the yes. One beneath. The center. This bottom. Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so there's 1 there.
That's correct. Yes. 1, 2. Yes.
This is 3.
3. Yes.
This was 4.
No. Okay. No, thank you very much. We'll have another guest. Yes, someone else in the audience. Yes, please go ahead. So the correct answer that I need is has to be 1 answer.
Has to be 1 answer?
Yes, so tell me please. How many faces?
You want me to count the ones and just?
Yes, sure.
So, yeah, her,
1,
that one,
2,
that one,
3,
that one.
4.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. To remove yourself, guys, should you wish. Who can identify the owners of the facial features in the image? This is where the experts will really be setting themselves apart. So, somebody from this side.
Are those your eyebrows? I know the mouth's Cristiano Ronaldo.
The answer by the way is no, they are not my eyebrows. Because that would be very unfair of me. Do we have an answer? Yes, please go ahead.
Well, the mouth is Cristiano Ronaldo.
That's fine.
The nose, I think it's. Oh no, it's not his nose. No, so much.
Okay, I have a lady. Yes, please go ahead.
Me?
Yes.
And the bottom's Ronaldo.
Okay.
The top is Drake.
Exactly.
Oh.
And I'm to the younger. Probably a bit.
You know, like the rapper.
Yes. That is correct. What about the nose?
The nose is very hard. I do not know who's that.
It's not your nose again, is it?
Okay, so I will please come to the front. I will give you this pin because you have to identify 2. So, just to conclude, the periocular region is actually, yes, in fact, Drake. He's an R&B singer. Some of you may or may not know. If you don't know, please do get to know. The nose is actually of a very well-known Bollywood actress who is now married to Nick Jonas, Priyanka Chopra. Oh, well, see you later. So it's the mouth, of course, I think correctly identified as Ronaldo. With that, I would like to thank you all for your patience, your attention, and your participation with me. It's been a true honor and a humbling experience to be before you presenting on this. I thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions. Thank you very much.